Hello, welcome to the Autism Research Coalition. This is an exciting program for me today. My name's Patricia Lemmer. I'm the author of Outsmarting Autism, and I'm honored to have as our guest today, Dr. Stephanie Seneff. Welcome, Stephanie. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
And Stephanie's talking to us from Hawaii. I'm amazed, and you're living in paradise.
Yes, indeed. Very privileged.
Before we get started, I just want to tell you about a new exciting partnership that the Autism Research Coalition has forged with the Brain Foundation, which has a mission to identify and fund scientific research leading to improved standard of care for individuals with autism spectrum disorders. And on the screen is a banner which tells you how to make a tax-deductible donation to the Brain Foundation, which will help people like Dr. Seneff with her really important research. So now that we've done that paid political announcement, Dr. Seneff is a senior researcher at MIT in the computer science and artificial intelligence lab called CSAIL. And she comes to us with background in biophysics and computer science and electrical engineering. But the most important work that she's doing now is with the research on glyphosate, which is the herbicide in Roundup. And Dr. Seneff, you fell into this, didn't you? You just
very much so.
You went down the rabbit hole.
I didn't expect to be doing what I'm doing now. Back, 20 years ago at this time, I'm really amazed at how hard I'm working and how important I feel my work is. I really feel it's very, very important.
And Dr. David Perlmutter has called this book and your work as analogous to Rachel Carson's work on DDT. And he says that your new book coming out, Toxic Legacy, which will be out in about a week, will stand shoulder to shoulder with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. I can't think of any higher praise than that, Dr. Seneff.
I was so thrilled when he wrote that. I was really honored, yes.
He says this is one of the most important books of our time, and I have downloaded the Kindle version already, and I can't wait to get my hands on the real thing. I just really like reading books. So tell us how you fell down this rabbit hole of glyphosate.
What is
glyphosate?
Yeah, so glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, and Roundup is a chemical that's used heavily in agriculture to control weeds, and also used very commonly on people's yards to control dandelions or weeds growing in the cracks in the walkway. We've been told it's a wonderful herbicide because it kills all plants, but it doesn't harm humans at all. And that is really a very big lie. As I've done my research, I realized that it's possibly even more toxic than the other herbicides that have been, many of the other herbicides that have restricted use. Glyphosate, you can just go down to the garden store, buy it, use it on your yard. You could have children playing in the yard while you're using it, use no protective equipment. But worse than that, it's all over the food supply. And this is what really has me concerned, because we're all being poisoned by it. Every time you eat a cookie, you're getting glyphosate. And the sad thing is that there have been high levels found in foods that are very popular with children, like goldfish crackers and Cheerios and Oreo cookies. These are very popular foods for children, and they all contain glyphosate at pretty high levels. And wheat is an example where they've been spraying it. It's not so they have the GMO crops, which have been engineered to resist glyphosate. This is something they've developed, this whole technology with genetic modification to be able to produce these super plants that are resistant to glyphosate, which allows them to just spray it all over the crop and the crop doesn't die. That's very handy for agriculture and makes our food cheap, but it ends up in the food that we eat as a consequence of that. And we're all being chronically poisoned, and it's accumulating in our tissues. And as we accumulate more and more, we start to get serious diseases. So it's really we're in a very dangerous situation right now. And the really sad thing is that when a woman is exposed during pregnancy, effects show up much later in the great-grandchildren. The grandchildren, the great-grandchildren have obvious damage as a consequence of being exposed with the great-grandmother, in utero. I mean, it's just amazing, this epigenetic effect that they're now finding these things are happening. So there's a lot of exciting new research coming out in the last few years. People are finally realizing, researchers weren't bothering to study it because they'd been told it was perfectly safe. But now,
Why would they think it was safe? What is the mechanism that they looked at that said glyphosate is safe for humans? And what is not, and that it affects our microbiome. Could you talk about that mechanism, please?
Right. Well, the argument is simple, which is that it affects an enzyme that's in a pathway, a biological pathway that human cells, not only do we not have that enzyme, our cells don't have that enzyme, they don't even have the entire pathway. So we're immune to it. And that's the message that we hear, is that because the enzyme that it affects is not something human cells have, human cells are safe. That's the argument. It's a very nice argument. It's flawed in a major way because our microbes do have that pathway. They do have that enzyme. They use that enzyme to make essential nutrients for the host. And those nutrients are really vital.
Enzyme in the pathway. Can you tell us that? Because people will be hearing about this enzyme in the pathway. And I wanted to get into the general vocabulary.
Yes. Okay. So the enzyme is called Epsp Synthase. And the pathway is called the Shikimate Pathway. And it's vital in plants. Actually, it's vital for their own robustness against toxic exposure. So they produce a lot of molecules out of that pathway that protect them from toxic chemicals. But they also, the gut microbes, many of our gut microbes have that enzyme and have a sensitive version of it, which means that when we eat foods that have glyphosate in them, those gut microbes get killed off. And they're unable to make those critical nutrients, which are the aromatic amino acids, tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine. Those are 3 of the critical 20 amino acids that are go into the DNA code for protein synthesis. So very, very important molecules. Not only are they essential in proteins, these 3 amino acids, but they are also precursors to many, many important biologically active molecules, such as all the hormones, melatonin, serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, melanin, the skin tanning agent, and thyroid hormone. All of those come out of that pathway. So when the gut microbes can't make enough of these aromatic amino acids, we become deficient in all of those derivatives. There's also B vitamins, and those are also very, very important. So all of these molecules that come out of that pathway are really essential for our well-being. And our gut microbes are getting exposed to glyphosate, so they can't produce enough of these vital nutrients, and then we start to see deficiencies which lead to disease.
So when you were referring to the gut microbes,
Mm-hmm.
You're referring to viruses and bacteria and parasites who are living in our microbiome, who are helpful to us in our digestion and are making different byproducts, correct?
Right. Let me show you this picture that I have here. Let's see if we can do this. This is a chart, and it shows, each of these boxes is how resilient this species is against glyphosate. So this is when they're exposed to glyphosate, how much are they killed off? What is their sensitivity to glyphosate? And you can see Clostridia and Salmonella are insensitive. They're very robust against glyphosate. Whereas bifidobacteria, you see that arrow pointing to that little tiny blip there. Bifidobacteria get clobbered. They get really clobbered by glyphosate. And bifidobacteria are super, super important in the infant gut. Whereas Clostridia produces, toxic metabolites that are associated with autism. So you get this imbalance in the gut microbiome where the bifidobacteria are very insufficient. And I talk about that. I have a whole chapter in my book on the gut microbiome. I worked really hard on that chapter, by the way. It took me a lot of reading before it finally coalesced into a story, because the gut is very, very complicated. And I see the picture quite clearly now. And it's not only disruption of the balance of the microbes, but also disruption of the pH of the gut. There's like acid versus base, and it's very critical to get the right pH in the gut, because different bacteria thrive under different acid-base conditions. And what's happening with glyphosate has been shown in experiments that it causes the pH to go up. So that the gut the pH is too high. The gut is not sufficiently acidic.
So if it's too high, it's more acid or alkaline?
More basic, yeah, more alkaline.
And
the thing is that ammonia is a very basic molecule, NH3, ammonia. And when you have, and what happens is glyphosate disrupts the ability of the infant to break down proteins. So, for example, to break down the proteins in milk, the microbes that help to digest the milk are busted by glyphosate. So the milk doesn't actually get digested; it ends up in the lower gut. And then there are these microbes that break down the proteins in the lower gut. They should have gotten broken down in the upper gut, but they didn't because the enzymes are broken by glyphosate. So they get into the lower gut, these specialized microbes that can break the proteins down at that point and actually break them down break down the amino acids and release the nitrogen. Amino acids contain nitrogen, and that nitrogen gets converted to ammonia, and the ammonia makes the gut pH go up. So it's a consequence of the inability to digest the proteins that causes the pH to go up. And when that happens, you lose the bacteria that make acetate, and butyrate in particular goes way down. So insufficient butyrate, too much propionate. These are the three short chain fatty acids that are produced by the gut microbes. Really, really critical for our health, extremely important nutrients, but the balance needs to be there. And with this basic gut, because of this ammonia, the microbes that make the acetate and the butyrate are insufficient, and you get too much propionate, too little butyrate, and that is linked to autism. They've shown in experiments that if you expose the brain of a mouse or a mouse to propionate, you can produce autism in that mouse. So excess propionate goes into the brain and disrupts the brain's function, and insufficient butyrate wrecks the gut. So that is the cells lining the gut wall love butyrate. That's their primary food, but there is insufficient amounts of it, so the gut wall gets sick. Those cells get sick, and then you end up with inflammatory bowel disease, which is linked to low butyrate. And here's another picture I have for that. This is the correlation between glyphosate usage over time on core crops and the inflammatory bowel disease prevalence in our society. You can see there's quite a good strong correspondence with this rise in inflammatory bowel disease. And we have colitis and IBD. We have a lot of issues. Of course, there's celiac disease as well, and that's directly connected. I don't have the plot here, but that one matches extremely well with glyphosate usage on wheat. Celiac disease, which is also an epidemic today. I never heard of it when I was a child, and now you've got large sections of the grocery store devoted to gluten-free foods. And gluten, of course, that's also linked to autism. Many of the autistic kids go on a gluten-free diet. That's due to the undigested wheat proteins, because gluten's a difficult protein to digest. It depends on breaking proline. Gluten has a lot of proline, and proline is a difficult amino acid to break apart from the other amino acids. You have specialized enzymes that do that. Those enzymes are common in the microbes that are getting killed by glyphosate. So
it's obvious that that limiting your exposure to glyphosate, and I want to get back to that in a minute, but I'm being bombarded by questions here about can you supplement these things that like butyrate and other bifida? Would that help, or is the dysbiosis and imbalance in the gut so bad in some kids that even if you supplement, will that not help?
Yeah, I think supplementing butyrate would probably be a good idea, or even to eat butyrate-rich foods. I love butter, and butter is one of the best sources of butyrate. I eat lots of butter. In fact, I eat a lot of high-fat dairy in general. I love sour cream and butter, and
so you must be a member of the Weston Price Foundation.
I am. Yeah, I love Sally. Yes, yeah. I've talked at her place for many years. I've given 3-hour presentations for many years at the.
And they have these giant slabs of butter to slab all over the bread at their conferences. They feed you the best of any conference.
I agree. And the sour cream, I love sour cream. I always pile lots of butter and sour cream on my potato. Yeah. They're fantastic foods, and I would highly support eating a lot of butter. Getting your child to eat butter would be a really good thing to do.
But it has to be butter from a cow that hasn't been given a lot of any kind of
Exactly.
antibiotics or eating grass that has glyphosate in it.
I know, it's so difficult, isn't it? I always buy grass-fed, but I don't know if you can trust it in even that anymore. So it's really sad that things have gotten so difficult. Of course, eating a certified organic diet, I think that's the absolute number one thing for the child, any autistic child for sure. Don't let them eat something that's not certified organic. And of course, also whole foods. And I think sulfur-containing foods, getting a little bit into the how to treat, but sulfur is critical. And I have a lot to say about sulfur in my book, and in particular
why is sulfur so critical?
Oh my, it's a long answer. So
the elevator answer.
Right. Yeah, we don't realize how important sulfur is. And it's not just getting enough sulfur, it's also all the enzymes that process sulfur in our body. Really, really fascinating. I've done a lot of reading on, about cysteine. N-acetylcysteine is a popular supplement, which is important because cysteine is a component of glutathione. So glutathione is a sulfur-containing tripeptide. It contains 3 amino acids, and one of them is glycine. So it has glycine, cysteine, and glutamate. And the cysteine contains sulfur, and the glycine, of course, is glyphosate is a glycine molecule. So I believe glyphosate's mechanism of toxicity has to do with substituting for glycine in critical places where it should be glycine, but it ends up being glyphosate instead because it fools the system into thinking that it's a glycine molecule when it's not. It is a glycine molecule.
They're chemically similar.
Yeah, it's the same. It is a glycine. Glyphosate is an amino acid, and it is an amino acid analog of glycine. And it is a complete glycine molecule, except for one hydrogen, which has been replaced by something called a methylphosphonate. So there's a big chunky thing stuck onto the nitrogen atom of glycine to make glyphosate. Very cleverly designed, because the methylphosphonate looks like phosphate. So that messes up the phosphate system. And then the glycine part messes up the glycine system. So you're getting disruption in your metabolism, both with things involving phosphate and in things involving glycine. And that's just a whole bunch of things. And I talk a lot about individual stories in my book about how you can connect. I look at diseases that are going up dramatically with glyphosate. I look at papers that write about the mechanism of that disease. And then I can find specific proteins that would be affected by glyphosate, disrupted by glyphosate to cause that disease. So there's a giant puzzle that I've been working out. I'm still working on it. It's like a huge puzzle.
So it's not just autism. You look at all kinds of degenerative diseases, neurological diseases, mental health diseases. You want to talk a little bit about its relationship to, say, depression and anxiety?
Right. Yeah, that's very simple, actually, because I remember I talked about the hormones, and serotonin is a really important hormone in the brain to control mood. And low serotonin is associated with both depression and violent behavior. And, we have an epidemic in violent behavior. We have all these school shootouts that we can't control, and we keep talking about gun control. But you really have to look back beyond the guns to say, why is it that some student in high school gets so freaked out that they feel compelled to go in and shoot up a bunch of kids in the class? I mean, that is so far away from a normal behavior. We never saw that kind of behavior back when I was a child. We never saw it.
So this is related to the gut imbalance that you can trace back to the glyphosate. Yeah,
the serotonin deficiency, which comes out of the Shikimate pathway. So very, very simple. The gut microbes are not making enough of the precursors to make the serotonin, and the serotonin is becoming deficient. And those precursors also go towards something called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NAD. Tryptophan is a precursor to NAD. And NAD is super, super critical in many metabolic reactions. I talk about that in my book as well. That's becoming deficient also because of glyphosate disrupting the gut microbiome. So we have deficiencies in various other B vitamins, as well as minerals. I didn't talk about minerals, but that's another whole issue, which is that
glyphosate's a chelator, is it not?
That's right. It binds very tightly
to our important minerals.
Zinc, manganese, cobalt, iron, even magnesium and calcium. It binds to what's called the +2 cations, positively charged, two plus charges. And those are really important minerals that are essential in small amounts. and they get disrupted. People have a lot of issues with mineral deficiencies, but also with mineral toxicities. And in fact, I wrote a whole paper on manganese, very, very interesting, because lactobacillus is a microbe that makes very heavy use of manganese to keep itself healthy. And manganese gets severely depleted by glyphosate. There was a study on cows that showed, they looked at the levels of different minerals in the blood of these glyphosate-exposed cows on 8 different farms in Denmark. And they found consistently all the cows, all the farms had levels of manganese and cobalt that were below the minimum of the required range. All the cows, all the farms.
Wow.
Extremely low manganese.
And isn't manganese deficiency, or I'm not sure which way it goes, too much manganese, too little, isn't that associated now with some other diseases like?
Absolutely. And including autism. And in fact, it's again very interesting. You hesitated too much, too little, and you were absolutely right to hesitate, because it's both too much and too little. That's the amazing thing. And that's because, and I wrote about it, we wrote about it in the paper. This was a paper I did with Anthony Samsel several years back. Fascinating. It was fun to do that study because we identified Parkinson's disease as well. There's a condition called manganism that is caused by, that shows up in welders because they're breathing in manganese when they're doing the welding. And they get the manganese into their nose. It goes down their, goes on the nerve fibers to the brainstem and messes up the brainstem nuclei and causes manganism, which is a disease that looks a whole lot like Parkinson's disease. And it's because of too much manganese in the brainstem.
So how do you get it out? And how do you get glyphosate out if you have not had an all organic diet, or you have tried but unsuccessfully, you have glyphosate? I've heard you speak with Dr. Klinghardt about the dangers of this. How do you get the glyphosate out?
Let me first finish. I'll get back to that question, but let me first finish the story about manganese, because glyphosate makes the manganese both toxic and deficient at the same time, which is really, really amazing, because manganese it normally goes to the liver, and then it gets bound to the bile acids, and it gets shipped back to the gut, attached to the bile acids, and then it goes into the blood, carried on the fatty acids. It goes into the blood and circulates in the blood and gets delivered to all the tissues. What happens is glyphosate suppresses bile acid production, and that's because it suppresses cytochrome P450 enzymes, which are essential for making bile acids. So you don't make enough bile acids. The manganese piles up in the liver, and then the liver ships the manganese along the nerve fiber, the vagus nerve, and ships it up to the brain. The same thing happens with the olfactory nerve with manganism. As they breathe it in, it goes from the olfactory nerve into the brainstem, from the vagus nerve into the brainstem, and the manganese accumulates at toxic levels in the brainstem while simultaneously being deficient in the blood. So it's really quite amazing. It's just the distribution system that's broken by glyphosate.
So what can you do?
Yeah, so how do you fix the problem? It's super, super important to do certified organic. And also you need to watch out about glyphosate in your water supply, glyphosate in the air. If you live near a field where they're spraying it, that's very dangerous. I don't know what to say. I would say move. If you're living next to a farm where they're spraying glyphosate, you need to move. I think it's just so dangerous. So you can have your water tested for glyphosate to see if it's contaminated. And of course, different times of the year, it may be okay at certain times and not at other times. And you can eat a certified organic diet. And then as far as getting rid of the glyphosate, it's not clear, although people have had some suggestions. And one, I read a paper that was very interesting, another paper on cows. They've been doing a lot of studies on cows because the cows are sick and they're getting exposed to lots of glyphosate in their GMO feed. And so people are studying the cows and trying to figure out how to make them healthy. So there was a nice paper that had cows that were sick. They checked the glyphosate in the urine, it was high. And they had the idea, and this probably comes from the naturopath community, but they had the idea of giving them sauerkraut juice, which is quite surprising. Sauerkraut juice, bentonite clay, and then fulvic acid and humic acid, which is complex organic molecules in the soil. Those are heavily sulfate containing complex glycosaminoglycans. These fulvic acid and humic acid are these complex molecules that are made by the plants I'm not sure who makes it, but they end up in the soil, organic matter in the soil. And those are apparently very good at binding glyphosate to help remove it through the feces. sauerkraut juice is interesting, and I have a sort of hypothesis that it might be that there are microbes in the sauerkraut juice that can metabolize glyphosate. And that seems like the best bet. If you can get your gut to harbor microbes that are able to metabolize glyphosate and that are not toxic to you, that don't produce toxic metabolites, that may be a tricky thing to do, but it's possible that that could work. To populate your gut with microbes that could break it down. That would be really, really awesome.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Have you identified any of those microbes by name?
Well, yeah, adenobacter. I'm losing the name. I think it's adenobacter. There's a microbe in sauerkraut and in apple cider vinegar that, and I'm for some reason losing the name. I write about it in my book, but I think it's funny. I can't quite get the name right now, but
something Bacter.
Huh?
Something Bacter.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's even right. I can't believe I can't get it. Acetobacter. I got it. Acetobacter.
Yes.
Sorry.
What are the
I've been doing too much with adenovirus lately. That got me mixed up. Acetobacter. That's the one.
Acetobacter.
Yeah.
So it's important that the sauerkraut juice comes from sauerkraut that's not been pasteurized, correct?
Right. Raw sauerkraut, which I just had some last night. I love it. We have a real great source here in Kauai of organic raw sauerkraut, which is really good.
And you can make that yourself, can't you?
You can, yes. I know people who do. I really should try to do that myself.
How long does it take to brew?
I don't know. It's a process. I mean, I think once you get it going, you can keep on making more, right? So you can continue that, which is probably a really cool thing to do. And I should become an expert on that.
Donna Gates does that with her body ecology diet, and she has cultures to get you to make these cultured vegetables.
Mm-hmm. Like the other thing is the sourdough bread, which I know a lot of people are able to keep the sourdough bread going, which is really great too. I love sourdough bread, and that is the bread I would recommend if you're going to eat bread. Organic sourdough is the one to eat.
What are some whole foods that help with the sulfur problem and with the mineral problems that people with autism should have as regular part of their diet?
Right. I think organic eggs are really hard to beat. They have a lot of good nutrients, and sulfur is one of them. They also have healthy fats and lots of minerals. So I really like eggs. Eggs are a really good food, and I think a lot of autistic kids are willing to eat eggs. Also grass-fed beef, seafood is really, really healthy in terms of the mineral content and also the healthy fats. So, clams and crabs and lobster and oysters, all of those are really, really healthy foods, as well as fish, of course, but you have to be careful with the mercury.
And you want to know the sources of these other animal products.
I know you have to be very careful to make sure that, and which is hard because everything's so toxic. So it's really hard to know where it came from, whether it's going to be okay in terms of toxicity. Of course, liver is also very, very healthy, but it's dangerous because most liver, it detoxes. So liver ends up with a lot of the toxic chemicals. So ideally, liver would be really good if it was a healthy animal, like chicken livers. We like organic chicken livers. Those are loaded with nutrients, lots of good minerals. Lots of good nutrients. And then, of course, also on the vegetable side, the cruciferous vegetables, garlic and onions. I really love garlic, and we eat tons of it in my household. We're constantly putting garlic in. And then to use herbs and spices very generously in your food, because those are also very, very healthy. Lots of emphasis on herbs and spices, especially garlic. Ginger, for example, is really healthy. So spice up your food and take the time to prepare food at home rather than buying, packaged foods.
We want our families to cook.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about the air and the soil where the food comes from? Does it help, say, for the water to have a filter, or for the air to have a filter at home? Would that take out glyphosate? If
I were stuck living next to a field, I would definitely put in an air filter for sure for my home. Yes, and there's a reverse osmosis filter will take out the glyphosate in water, but unfortunately, it also takes out all the minerals. And the minerals in water are really important. So you need to put those back in. You're going to strip them away with the reverse osmosis filter. So you need to put minerals back into the water after you filter it, which becomes kind of a pain, but that's what you would need to do there.
And how would you do that, with electrolytes or with?
Yeah, I think you can get something that's sort of all the minerals in the balanced form, and then just squirt, put some into the water, a certain amount after it's filtered.
And Dr. Klinghardt likes Fiji water.
Oh, that's probably good. Yeah, I think he's probably right. Fiji water is probably good. Is that a mineral water? Or
it's a mineral water, and it has silica in it, he says. And
oh, yeah, silica is quite interesting because it's been shown that silica can remove aluminum. And aluminum is a big deal with autism. So that's important. Also, glyphosate helps to get aluminum into the brain. I wrote a paper on that about the pineal gland. It was quite interesting. We found that in studies, they found the pineal gland has a lot more aluminum than other parts of the brain. So it tends to concentrate there because it's outside of the brain barrier. It's easier for the aluminum to get into the pineal gland. And yeah, that's really scary. And of course, the pineal gland is what produces the melatonin.
Right.
And we have an epidemic in sleep disorder. If I had that one printed out, I could show you, but that's another perfect match with glyphosate usage.
So the sleep disorders are going up exponentially, just like those other diseases.
Right. There's such a huge list of diseases. And I'm very concerned about, there's autism in the children, and then there's Alzheimer's in the adults. And we have an epidemic in Alzheimer's disease also going up exactly in step with glyphosate. And people are getting Alzheimer's at younger and younger ages. It's really, really tragic. We have such a burden on our society on both ends, the children with autism and the adults with Alzheimer's.
In the same families.
Right, often the same families. It's just terrible. And because certain people have genetic susceptibilities. I mean, it is true that autism has a genetic component. I won't deny that, but it's really the genetics working in combination with the toxic chemicals. And one of them is aluminum and also glyphosate. They're synergistically toxic. Glyphosate increases the damage that aluminum does to the brain.
Does it do that with other toxic metals like mercury?
Yes, I'm quite sure it does. And I talked about that in my book as well. In fact, that it relates to the gut microbes and how mercury gets metabolized. And it's glyphosate disrupts the enzymes. This is, again, the sulfur system, because mercury gets sulfated in the liver, and that's how it can be removed. But that system gets broken by glyphosate. And then mercury gets methylated by the gut microbes, and you get a much more toxic form of mercury that can get into the brain.
Wow. And sometimes people take molybdenum.
Mm-hmm. That's an important one, and that's connected to sulfide oxidase. Sulfide oxidase is one that I talk about a lot in my book, and I think it's connected to, oops, I'm doing that the wrong way. It's connected to, it's hard to figure out where that's coming from. Sulfide oxidase deficiency is connected to autism, and that also gives you sulfur sensitivities. A lot of people say, oh, I can't eat sulfur-containing foods, I get sick. And that's likely because sulfide oxidase has been disrupted by glyphosate. And I think glyphosate disrupts the enzyme that makes that molybdenum cofactor that's essential for sulfide oxidase. So when sulfide can't be oxidized to sulfate, you get sulfate deficiency, but you also get sulfite toxicity because sulfite is highly reactive. Normally, the gut microbes very quickly change sulfite into something else, either sulfate or they bring it down and make an organic sulfur molecule out of it, namely methionine. And methionine is another one that gets disrupted by glyphosate.
Now, you mentioned the multi-generational domino effect earlier on in the talk about how you may not see it in this generation, but it gets passed down. Could you?
Yeah, I mentioned that before we started, I think. So we can bring that up again.
Talk about that, how that mechanism.
Yeah, no, this is actually really amazing, and they're finally figuring this out. I think that, as I said, I didn't maybe make this clear, but Monsanto made it look like this enzyme, this toxic chemical is so safe that we don't need to study it, and so people weren't studying it at low doses. They were like, well, if it's not toxic at high doses, we don't need to look at low doses. But glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor, and endocrine disruptors are more toxic at very low doses than they are at higher doses, a very unique property of them. And it's finally become clear to the researchers that glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. So they're studying it now, really just in the last few years. They've been studying exposure of animals to low dose glyphosate over a period of time. And so what they find in particular, they zeroed in on this whole idea of endocrine disruption and multi-generational effects, and they exposed pregnant rats or pregnant, I don't know if it mice, maybe. I always mix up the rats and the mice, pregnant rodents to glyphosate during a critical period in pregnancy, which they knew was related to the development of the next generation. The germ cells of the female fetus are put in place before the female has developed into a human form, very, very early in the pregnancy. One of the first things that the female fetus does is to get prepared for the next generation, and makes all the germ cells that are going to become future, its children. Wow. And those germ cells, if they get exposed to glyphosate, they get into very big trouble. They do this epigenetic alteration of policy that actually then shows up in the next generation, and even in multiple subsequent generations, down at least 5 generations in the future. But they found in these studies with these rodents that they could expose the pregnant mouse to glyphosate, and then the offspring looked like they were fine. The offspring had offspring, and you started to see some reproductive issues there, but their offspring started to have problems. And then you go back to the 3rd generation, all of a sudden you see a lot of problems, reproductive issues, and various problems with the kidneys. I mean, there was testosterone difficulties, lots of different problems showed up in the 3rd generation. It got worse with each generation.
And how about, is it implicated in gender dysphoria?
Yes, I think so. That's another one that I am suspecting that glyphosate is contributing to that. We know that atrazine, you probably know about atrazine. Tyrone Hayes is a researcher, I think at Berkeley, and he has done many studies with atrazine, which is another herbicide, and he has found that it can cause male frogs to develop into female-like frogs that can even reproduce. It's quite amazing. They have only the male genome. They don't have the female. You have the XY. They only have the Y, but they can produce offspring. They turn into female frogs as a consequence of atrazine exposure. So that's an example of an herbicide that can do amazing things to the reproductive system. I think glyphosate is also causing that. Glyphosate is also causing infertility problems, both in males and in females. I have a chapter in my book on the reproductive system and the damage that glyphosate does there. It's quite striking. We have a huge problem with male fertility. We're becoming aware of decreasing number, lower count, and lower mobility in the sperm. Recently, there's a big, lots of articles coming out about the Western world, basically, Europe and the United States, even China, is really getting problems with male fertility. And I think glyphosate's a major player in that.
And you have been quoted, I've heard many places about that projecting forward that by 2025, 2032, that there won't be any normal males left.
Right. I think it's going to, well, if my predictions come true, and I've been really trying to dramatize that because I'd like to get awareness. I mean, the government is like, oh, yeah, the autism rates went up again. What else is new? I mean, they don't seem to care. I don't understand why they don't recognize this as an emergency. It really frustrates me. I think it's much worse than the problem we're having with COVID-19. When you think about all these children that are going to grow up, and many of them can't even talk. I mean, it's just a devastation in our society that we're just letting it happen, and we're just kind of throwing up our arms saying, well, we don't know. We don't know. That's always the answer. It just really frustrates me.
It's a mystery, right?
Yeah, it's a mystery. And also it's genetic. We can't control it. It's genetic. Well, why would you have a genetic disease going up exponentially? It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
And so I lost track of where I was going with that.
Well, we were talking about no normal males.
Yes, 80%. So my projection, if I just took the curve on, and it's an exponential growth, so you can plot it on a log linear scale, and you just project the line. Very simple math. And if you look at the numbers, it turns out 2032 is the magic year in which half the children born, which is 80% of the boys, 20% of the girls, will end up on the autism spectrum. The kids born that year. It's quite terrifying.
Whoa.
2032, it's not that far away.
And if any of our listeners have teenagers who might be giving birth in 2032, what can they do? They can have an organic diet. They can detox their glyphosate with sulfur-containing foods, and what else?
Another thing that Klinghardt likes is to take glycine supplements, and I'm thinking that might be a good idea. I certainly support drinking bone broth, organic again, grass-fed beef bones. Cook them for a long time in water, add some veggies. You can make a delicious soup really with the bone broth, and that it will contain a lot of glycine because there's a lot of glycine in the bone. This is collagen. Collagen. Some people take collagen supplements. You have to watch out because collagen has extremely high levels of glycine in it. It has this whole sequence of GXY, 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 where every third amino acid is a glycine. Very, very glycine-rich protein. And so collagen or gelatin, those are all glycine-rich nutrients, which I think it's well motivated to eat a lot of glycine in the context of glyphosate, because the glyphosate, if there's more glycine, then it can outcompete glyphosate in situations where glyphosate could be causing damage. So making sure you get lots of glycine is a good idea, I think.
More Weston Price wisdom.
Exactly, yes. And also taurine is an interesting amino acid.
And tell us about taurine.
Taurine is a sulfur-containing amino acid. So there's cysteine, methionine, and taurine. Those are the three sulfur-containing amino acids. And as I said, sulfur is super important. I think we have a major problem with sulfur deficiency and sulfur mismanagement because of broken enzymes in the sulfur system. But taurine it's a unique amino acid. It has a sulfonate attached to it, which is almost sulfate. It just needs one more oxygen to become sulfate. And it's been shown experimentally that the gut microbes can make sulfate out of taurine. And apparently our own cells can't do that. Taurine is pretty inert. For a long time, they thought that taurine was just, it's found in high concentrations in the heart, the liver, and the brain, which is very interesting to me. They store it.
Where do we get it from? Where do we get
fish? Fish is a really good source of taurine, and also grass-fed beef. Some animal-based proteins contain a lot of taurine. Plant-based proteins contain none, which is quite interesting. 0. So it's uniquely an animal-based amino acid.
And so if you're a vegetarian and eating a plant-based diet, you're
getting no taurine.
No taurine.
Yes.
And you could have other deficiencies. You keep referring to these animal products as important to these minerals and amino acids.
Yes, I think it's difficult I wouldn't say it's impossible to have a completely plant-based diet and be healthy, but it's difficult. Especially, of course, cobalamin is another one you need to worry about, because plant-based diet, you won't get cobalamin, B12, and that's another one that's a critical one in autism. I've written papers about it. Very interesting, and it's connected to sulfur. Actually, I have a paper that I wrote together with Greg Nye, where we talked about cobalamin deficiency, linking it to glyphosate, and explaining the sort of metabolic pathways that change in the context of cobalamin deficiency. It's quite fascinating how the body does all these workarounds. They sort of change policy, and that ends up with high propionate. By the way, with the cobalamin deficiency, you end up with high propionate. Propionate is the one I mentioned, the short chain fatty acid that's linked to autism. So I think cobalamin deficiency is another problem in autistic kids, and that's being caused, I think, by glyphosate disrupting the cobalamin.
And we have found that the type of cobalamin that you supplement with, whether it's IV cobalamin or oral, is important. Can you touch on that a little?
Well, and there's also different forms of cobalamin, hydroxycobalamin and
that's what I meant.
Methylcobalamin. It's quite interesting because cobalamin binds to these other molecules, these small molecules. It combines to them, and it assists it's a cofactor for many different enzymes to help them do their job, and it gets converted among the different forms in your body.
Right.
And exactly which form should you be taking is hard to know. And of course, as you said, both, you can have it. I think there's like a liposome. Is there like a liposomal cobalamin? I don't know. I've never taken it as a supplement. I approach just eating foods that are rich in cobalamin is another thing to do. And again, that's going to be, it's like eggs, for example.
But which cobalamin is it? Many of our kids are supplemented with methylcobalamin, and we found that some of the cheaper products have cyanocobalamin.
Yes, that's right. That's another one. Cyanocobalamin, methylcobalamin, hydroxycobalamin. There's all those different forms. And it's the thing that's attached to the cobalamin that's different there. And your body's able to move it around too. You can convert one to the other. But you could have a deficiency in an enzyme that does that, in which case you would really want to take the one that supports the defective enzyme, if you see what I mean. If you can't make it, you need to take it as a supplement. And that could be that you've got a disruption in one of the enzymes that, for example, makes the methylcobalamin. There's a lot of messing up of the methylation pathways caused by glyphosate. And I talk about that in my book as well. The methylation pathways and the sulfation pathways are all messed up.
Whoa. So you mentioned briefly, you threw COVID in there, that the autism epidemic is worse than this COVID phenomenon that we're living through now. It's hard not to have a talk with anybody and not talk about COVID. You've gone down the COVID rabbit hole too. You want to talk about that?
I certainly have. Yes, as soon as I started looking into COVID, I suspected glyphosate. Of course, I'm always suspecting glyphosate because it does so much. I feel like it's so central to many of our problems. And I am becoming every day more convinced that I'm right, that glyphosate toxicity is a marker for COVID bad outcome. That basically people who have been chronically poisoned by glyphosate are much more susceptible to dying from COVID-19. I think the pattern is extremely clear to me. And particularly, I've been suspecting glyphosate in the air. And that's also linked then to biofuels. And so I really learned a lot about biofuels in the last year. I was only vaguely aware that they existed before. But when I saw the outbreaks that started a year ago in the spring with Wuhan and then the Lombardy region of northern Italy and then New York City, we had bang, 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 those three places that got hit hard by COVID. And all three of them are places where glyphosate is heavily used and biofuels are being heavily pushed. So the biofuel industry has really taken off just in the last few years. It's really growing exponentially. There's a lot of excitement about it as a way to help reduce oil consumption. So it relates to climate change, and there's a lot of sort of feel-good attitudes of, things around being able to turn food sources or plants into fuel, sort of a way to help with the climate crisis.
Like everything, there's a front and a back. There's the good.
Well, yeah. Well, the problem is if you're going to spray your food with glyphosate, if you're going to spray your field with glyphosate, and then you're going to use that field to make fuel, you're going to have glyphosate in the fuel. And this is what I think is happening. And it's quite striking. You take a wheat field, you spray it with glyphosate just before harvest as a desiccant. That's why we have a lot of glyphosate contamination in gluten. And then you harvest the wheat, and then you take the stubble and you ship it to a manufacturing plant where it can be turned into biofuel, like biodiesel, biogas, bioethanol, and then that biofuel is burned in trucks, for example, and buses in New York City. New York City is a major leader. All these cities that are like major ports, water ports, places that mouth of a major riverway, where there's a lot of container, a lot of ports involved, is a place where you can ship stuff. You can go down the waterway to get all the goods to the place where you're going to turn it into biofuel. You have a lot of biomass that goes into these factories that are in the city. And the factory's probably releasing glyphosate, but it's also, I think, ending up as a contaminant in the fuel. And then when the fuel is burned, it's getting evaporated
into the air.
It's getting evaporated before it reaches combustion. That's what I think is happening. It's also probably being combusted, and that's also probably producing toxic metabolites, like the phosphorus and the nitrogen that are in glyphosate are going to be toxic contaminants in the air. So the glyphosate itself, but also the combustion products of glyphosate, are going to be lung irritants when you're breathing that air in the city. The glyphosate is a major has a major effect on the immune system, and I have a whole chapter on that as well. Autoimmunity, immune suppression. Glyphosate messes up the innate immune system very badly. So when you're breathing glyphosate into the lungs, your lungs' immune system becomes damaged. The virus comes in, and your innate immune system is not able to fight it off. So the virus starts multiplying furiously. And once you have a lot of viruses in your lung, your adaptive immune system takes off, and it just gets crazy. It just produces crazy amounts of cytokines, and these things are very destructive to the tissue. So you basically ruin the lungs. You end up not being able to breathe. Downward spiral. And I think it's because your innate immune system is not strong enough to clear the virus.
So how can we stay strong against COVID?
Eat a certified organic diet. The other thing I haven't mentioned is getting out in the sunlight. And, I live in Hawaii. I spend a lot of time outside. I really work hard to to get enough sun exposure. I don't believe you can get too much sun. I mean, as long as you develop a tan so that you don't burn, you don't want to burn, of course, but you don't need to. I don't use sunscreen, and I don't even wear sunglasses.
Vitamin D and glyphosate, are they synergistic? Good.
Glyphosate disrupts the enzyme in the liver that activates vitamin D. That's a cytochrome P450 enzyme. So we have an epidemic in vitamin D deficiency, very dramatic epidemic. Everyone's taking high doses of vitamin D supplements. It's not able to be activated because the cytochrome P450 enzymes in the liver are being suppressed. And so it's not able to be functional. It needs to be, it's actually two steps, one in the liver, one in the kidney. Both involve cytochrome P450 enzymes, which have been shown to be suppressed by glyphosate in multiple studies.
Is glyphosate doing harm to our biodiversity and our wildlife, and is it implicated with the bee problem?
Absolutely. I've been frustrated that it's taken so long for them to notice that glyphosate's a factor in the bee die-off, bee colony collapse syndrome, and also the monarch butterfly. It's so clear with both of them, in my opinion, that glyphosate's a major factor. And because they assumed it was safe, they weren't looking at it. And chlorpyrifos, of course, is another. These insecticides are definitely hurting the bees as well. But that's, again, synergistic toxicity with glyphosate, because those cytochrome P450 enzymes are essential for breaking down other toxic chemicals like chlorpyrifos, which is the insecticide that's been causing bee damage. So the bees aren't as able to clear the chlorpyrifos when they're also exposed to glyphosate. It's synergistic toxicity with multiple chemicals in the environment.
Is glyphosate in vaccines?
Yes, well, that's another one that both Anthony Samsel, who's been collaborating with me on a number of papers, and Zen Honeycutt, who's she's the founder of Moms Across America. She's a fantastic woman. I really like her. She's a friend of mine. And both of them independently tested multiple vaccines for glyphosate. And they found consistent stories between the two of them, which was really, really shocking. And they found glyphosate in the live virus vaccines in particular. The vaccines that have the aluminum in them did not have glyphosate. They did not have a live virus. And for that reason, they didn't need to grow them. So the live virus vaccines are manufactured by growing the virus in a culture. And in that culture, you're using things that contain glyphosate as nutrients in the culture. So, for example, gelatin, collagen. The gelatin is coming from this collagen, which is extremely high in glycine. Glyphosate I believe it's substituting for the glycine in the collagen, and it's getting contaminated. And in fact, Anthony found glyphosate in collagen. He found it in bone. He got a bone from the butcher, from a cow, and he found glyphosate in the bone. He found glyphosate in collagen. He found glyphosate in gelatin, Jello, in fact. Wow. And he found glyphosate in the vaccines. It's all consistent. And there's also fetal bovine serum, which also probably contains glyphosate. That's from a cow fetus, the blood from cow fetus, that contains glyphosate. That's another thing they use in these cultures when they grow these viruses in culture to make the vaccine. And so, and eggs too, eggs contain glyphosate. That's been found in tests, and lots of them are grown on eggs, like the flu vaccine. They found glyphosate in the flu vaccine. Varicella, MMR, interestingly, had by far the highest levels in both Anthony's experiment and in Zen Honeycutt's experiment. MMR had the highest levels by a large margin. And of course, MMR is the one that's been linked to autism very controversially by Andrew Wakefield.
Yeah. What about the mRNA vaccines? And
MMR, it's MMRA, is that right? mRNA vaccines. Oh, messenger RNA vaccines. Yeah. Oh my God. I don't know if they contain glyphosate, but they are extremely toxic. I wrote a whole paper over 40 pages, like a 45-page paper together with Dr. Greg Nye. We published this paper in a journal. It's a peer-reviewed journal, open access, so you can get it, the whole thing, for free. You don't have to pay $40 for it. I recommend reading that paper. It's Greg Nye, NIGH, and Stephanie Seneff. It starts off with worse than the disease ? And then it's something about the messenger RNA vaccines. We did a deep dive, and we did a lot of research in how those vaccines are manufactured, and they are extremely not natural. Every step of the way, they're not natural, and they're forcing your cells to produce huge amounts of spike protein, which is the most toxic part of the virus. And that spike protein is causing a lot of problems with severe adverse reactions in many cases, sometimes including death, and even among young children. We're seeing death in 12-year-old, the kids, now the young kids are getting the vaccine down to 12 years old. And they're finally, the CDC, I think, is finally becoming concerned about the heart problems. I don't know if you've heard about that, but
Right.
Young people, young men in particular, are getting heart disease, myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart.
Right.
From the mRNA. And that's because of the ACE2 receptors. The vaccine spike protein is binding to the ACE2 receptors in the heart and causing this inflammatory response.
Wow. And Klinghardt talks a lot about the role of electromagnetic radiation and autism. Can you talk about that relationship with glyphosate?
I think that's likely to also be synergistic with glyphosate. In fact, I'm aware of papers that have shown that the EMFs induce calcium uptake by the cells. And this is something glyphosate also induces. So that's, again, synergistic toxicity. Excess calcium uptake by the neurons can cause neuroexcitotoxicity.
And how does that manifest itself in autism?
Well, it's destroying the neurons, so it's obviously doing damage to the brain.
Wow. Dr. Seneff, where are you going next? What's your next paper? This book is so exciting. We're just waiting with bated breath for it to come out. I see that it's a #1 new release on Amazon.
Yeah, here you go again, toxic.
Yeah, I hope that everybody who's listening will buy it and tell everybody they know to buy it. And how long did it take you to write?
Oh, it was a major ordeal. I spent a whole year writing it, and I submitted it to the publisher last January, and they were quite disappointed. It was way too long and way too technical. So we all kind of took a breather. COVID-19 hit, and we were like, we don't know what to do with this book. It's too long. It's too technical. And finally, I got help actually from Jennifer Margulis, who's a friend of mine. She helped me to rewrite the book, really another whole year practically, simplifying it, reducing it. So I left out a bunch of stuff. I mean, I have a lot more to say. Simplified and increasing the amount of background to help novice readers. So the goal is to try to make it accessible to people who don't have a lot of biology background. I'm not sure we succeeded because it is, biology is tough.
It is.
The way glyphosate works is also tough. So there's certainly biology in there, but I tried to, I think it came out to be a much more accessible book after this 2-year effort. Heroic, part of everybody involved.
Jennifer, right?
It was really a challenge. And now I'm working on another book with Greg Nye. We're hoping, we'll see if we can pull it off. But
and what's going to be on?
And there's a new item in there, which is deuterium. And I'll just mention that now, glyphosate and deuterium. And deuterium is something I only first became aware of, that it was related to health a year ago. December 2019 was when I first realized that deuterium is something you need to pay attention to. Deuterium is heavy hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most common atom, in the universe. It's the smallest. It's just got 1 proton, 1 electron. Deuterium is a natural isotope of hydrogen with an extra neutron. So it's heavy hydrogen. It's twice as heavy.
Wow.
And it's everywhere. It's natural, so it's part of life. And turns out it has very different properties from hydrogen. And it goes wherever hydrogen goes. So you end up with unexpected surprises. The enzyme thinks it's going to be a hydrogen and it's a deuterium. The things don't work the same way. So biology has actually evolved incredibly sophisticated mechanisms for trying to keep deuterium out of the mitochondria. And the mitochondria have these ATPase pumps that are really beautiful enzymes. They're so amazing. They make you believe in God when you see how special these enzymes are. But they get messed up by deuterium. And so a lot of enzymes working around the mitochondria are making sure that they don't see a lot of deuterium. So the body tries hard to keep deuterium out of the mitochondria using several enzymes that are disrupted by glyphosate. So what I think is happening is we're getting major problems with deuterium toxicity. And that can explain a lot of the diseases that we're seeing going up in step with glyphosate. So in other words, I think glyphosate is making deuterium toxic, and that's causing disease, many, many different diseases, and really messing up metabolism. So it's quite interesting.
Wow. So how can people follow you? Do you have a website? Do you have a Facebook page? Tell us how we can follow you.
Okay, I've decided I do have a Facebook page and I have a lot of Facebook followers, but I got mad at Facebook, so lately I have not been posting on Facebook because they jailed me for very unreasonable things, and I got very angry. So now I'm on MeWe. I've been developing and I'm following on MeWe, and also on Twitter. I've been posting on Twitter and MeWe lately, and then I have StephanieSeneff.net, which is my webpage, and I have StephanieSeneff.net/book, where you can find all the different booksellers that are selling my book.
And when do you expect to have the next one out?
I don't know. I'm getting so busy with all my email and whatnot and all my podcasts, and it's coming slowly. So we're gathering lots and lots of information, and we're still in the early stages. So it'll be a while. Both of us are really busy, so it's hard to get the time, but we're excited about it. And of course, we're still learning about deuterium as well.
We sure are. And so I wish you best of luck with the toxic legacy, and we will be watching for you and for good reviews of this book. I know that it got a wonderful Kirkus.
Yes, I was really pleased about that.
The Kirkus starred review. I got that on my book. I was jumping up and down, and it makes such a difference for people to really know that this is a valuable product. And I agree with Dr. Perlmutter that we are looking at a really important book. He called it one of the most important books of the century. So congratulations, and thank you so much for appearing with us and educating our listeners. And I'm sure this will get great viewing as we post it all over the social media, and you do too. So have a wonderful summer and stay away from COVID, I guess.
Stay away from glyphosate.
And glyphosate, and keep your vitamin D levels up. And you want to leave people with one last words of wisdom.
I don't know, just eat organic. Really do it for yourself, and also do it for the farmers, because if we can do this bottom up grassroots, if we just all start refusing to buy the non-organic food, they'll stop making it. We just need to make that food not sellable. And then if all of us can really work hard to buy organic, it's worth the extra money for your own health. You'll save so much money on your health by being healthy as a consequence of eating organic, and you will be forcing the farmers to grow organic as you increase the demand. So that's the most important thing, I think, is just to buy organic, eat organic, tell your friends, tell your family to do the same thing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Seneff. It's just a pleasure working with you and talking to you today. I'm honored.
Thank you so much for doing this. This was my pleasure.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.